In this video, we're going to be replacing the oil pan in this 2005 Honda Element. The process will be the same for the first generation from 2003 to 2011. It's located underneath your engine. You will need to lower your subframe. So we're going to take our dipstick out. We're going to set that aside. And we're going to take our engine oil cap off and set that aside as well. So now we're underneath the vehicle with our oil catch can set underneath the oil pan. With a 17mm socket, we are going to take out our drain plug in our oil pan. Now that we've drained our oil, we can go ahead and put our oil plug back in. So what we're going to do from underneath the vehicle is we're going to put a pole jack on the driver's side, right behind the control arm, a little bit further towards the back. If you'll see back here where the bolts are, you have a little uneven surface, so we're going to pick the flattest spot we can on the driver's side. We're going to do the same thing on the passenger side. And then up front, we're going to put one jack right in the middle on the front of our subframe on the flattest spot. What we're going to do now is raise these pole jacks up so they make contact. All right, so we've just made contact, and we're going to give it maybe a half a turn up just to keep it locked in place. We're going to do the same thing for the back too. Now if you were working on the ground, what you would want to do here is jack up your vehicle from your jack points, raise your front suspension up, put a jack stand in these same locations, and then rest your vehicle onto the jack stands. All right, so we just make contact and press up a little bit. So what we're trying to do is make sure the jacks don't move. So the first thing we're going to do to release our subframe is remove our front motor mount bolt. Now on the driver's side, on the other side of this, there's a captured nut. So on this side, it's going to be a 17mm. So now up in front by our driver's side, we're going to see a little tow hook. We're going to go for the bolt right in front of that. There's going to be one in each corner. Should have 4 in total. That's going to be your subframe bolt. It's going to be a 17mm. We're not going to back this out all the way. We're just going to come down a little bit. Find our tow hook. Directly in front of that is going to be our other bolt. Now we have the subframe here supported from below. So what we don't want to do is take these bolts all the way out. So we'll take them down about a finger's width distance here, about 3/4 to an inch. But make sure they're still threaded in. We'll do the same thing in the back too. Now our bolt in the rear is going to be just in front or just forward of your sway bar. It's going to be just next to your sway bar bushings here. It's also going to be a 17mm. We'll do the same. And on the driver's side, same thing, just next to or in front of your sway bar bushing. now that we have our 4 bolts loosened up, you can start to lower your cradle. Just lower it down slowly. All right, so right about here. We're going to do the same thing on the other 3. And you can see just slowly lowering it down. Now it's okay if it doesn't come all the way down. We're still working each corner or 3 poles individually, so it will eventually come down enough for us to get our oil pan out. So now what we want to do before we start removing our oil pan is remove this cover here. It's going to be 1, 2, 3 bolts, 2 facing up, 1 facing sideways. They're going to be 10 millimeters. We're going to remove that cover now. And our last one. And we can lower our cover. So in our oil pan, we're going to find our drain plug here. We're going to go right up above this. This is going to be a nut, or it's going to be a stud from the motor side. I'm going to take off that nut. Again, these are all going to be 10 millimeter. Well, looks like the stud came out with that nut, which is not ideal. So to help me remember where my bolts are going to go, because you have longer and shorter bolts, I'm going to take the new oil pan, and as I take the bolts out, I'm going to put them in place representing our pan on the vehicle. So now we're just going to continue removing these bolts. What I want you to notice is the size of some of these bolts may be different. You want to make sure they go back into the same locations. And then we have one more stud, which will probably come out. Oh, here we go. So this is ideal. This is what you want to see on your 2 studs. You want to see the stud remain in the vehicle or in the block on both sides. So when we put our new pan on, we're going to use those 2 studs to hold our pan. So now we have 5 bolts on the passenger side inner wheel well area. These are the toughest bolts. This area is the reason that we lowered the cradle. So to get in here, we're going to use a shallow or a short bit with a tool. Take these bolts out. We may be switching tools a couple of times in here. So now our last bolt here behind the serpentine belt is a little difficult, and this is the setup that we're going to use. Just a short extension with a short 10 mil. That'll allow you to get in behind the belt. Now to use this extension and setup, you will need to take this out before you back the bolt all the way out, or your tool will get stuck. So now what we're going to use is a small flat blade panel tool, and we're going to try to get between the oil pan and the block. We're going to also try to not do any damage to the block or that surface where the pan mates up to. There is a tool for this, but if you don't have it, what you can do is get a tool in here between the pan and the block and try and break that seal. We're also going to use a rubber mallet, and before we try and put anything between the two, we're going to hit the pan a few times with a rubber mallet just to see if we can knock it free. You do need to be careful. There is a pickup and a screen inside here that you don't want to damage. Okay, so no movement. So you have much more room to work on the rear of the oil pan. So we're trying to get the front to come free on the back side here, but you may need to move up front and do the same process up front, because it seems that's still sealed up pretty good. There also is the stud up front here that you want to try not to bend. Just pull straight down. That seemed to work. So now what we have is our oil pan free. Now we're ready to take it out, and it's got to come out down towards the driver's side. So our oil pan here will come down in the front, but we're still getting hung up in the back. So we're very close, but there's not a lot of room in the back to tilt in or tilt out. So what we need to do now is remove our two front cradle bolts and lower, and we may actually even come in with a pry bar and pull down the front of our cradle to get our oil pan out. So we'll start on this side, we'll remove this bolt. Now on this side. Now we're gonna, so you can see we're still free, the cradle doesn't want to move. We're gonna lower our jack here a little bit. We'll come in with a pry bar and just pull our cradle down a little more. What we're doing now is using our 2x4 as a spacer to keep our cradle lowered. So now part of the trick that we've been doing is slowly lowering the rear two bolts and slowly lowering our pole jacks as we work to gain just enough clearance to get our oil pan out. So now what we have is the rear two bolts out to the maximum that we're willing to pull them out to. Our pole jacks down as low as we can, a pry bar up front. That should hopefully gain us the clearance we need. So now this surface here, where you can see our old gasket, what looks to be an old material gasket as well as RTV, needs to come off. What we're going to use is just a straight razor blade. We're going to hold it tight to the block. And what we're looking for is a surface like this here, nice and clean. So we'll do that all the way around. Now the area you want to be very careful of is by the crank pulley, or on the passenger side area here where you have your gears for your pump. I'm going to try and keep any material out of those gears and out of that area. Now that we have our old RTV and gasket out of the way, what we're going to do is give it a quick wipe down with some brake clean. Now before we put our oil pan in the vehicle, we're going to put on our gray gasket maker. We're going to put a nice bead across the raised area here. And you don't want to let this sit long after you do this. You want to take it almost right to the vehicle. So we're going to come back and redo this little section here. Just going to use some brake clean on a rag. Mainly we just want to make sure we're not inside the pan. Now that we have our RTV, or gasket maker, on our oil pan, we're going to go ahead and put it into place. We've also cleaned our oil pan mating surface for the gasket. So now what we're going to do is put in the back side, or the hardest side of this job first. So to do that, we're going to use a pry bar and pull our cradle down. So once you have your oil pan past your cradle, which is usually the hardest part that we're fighting here, I'm going to go ahead and raise it up into position. What we're going to try and do is locate our two studs. And our two studs, we're going to put the nuts on our studs, and that will hold our pan in place for us. All right, so now I'm just going to thread these on finger tight. And our other stud actually fully came out, so we're going to have to put that in. But this one will hold our pan mostly in place. And on the other side, we'll put our stud in place. Now we have two free hands. We can work around and put our bolts back in, and then we'll come back and torque them down. So what we did originally was take our bolts out, because we do have some that are longer than others. So we want to make sure they go back into the right place, and we did put them in our new pan, but our new pan has to go in the vehicle. So we traced the outline and marked the location of where each bolt was and the studs as well as the drain, so we knew the orientation. And now we have a layout of which bolt goes where. Simple cardboard, and you can take your bolts and just poke them through. So we're just going until we feel a little bit of resistance, and then moving on to the next one. We'll come back and torque them down. You don't want to over torque these. Now, something to note is some of your screws may have gasket on the end of them. You want to remove as much of that gasket material as you can, including the end of your screws. So the reason you want your nuts and bolts a little bit loose while you're doing your pan is we're having an issue lining up one of the bolts. This will allow you to shift your pan just a little bit to get those holes to line up. Just moving along. All right, and the last one will be up in here. So we have a little drippage here in the end. We'll just clean that up and send in our last bolt. So now that we have our oil pan installed and all of our bolts loosely tightened up, we're going to come back now and tighten them all down to 8.7 foot-pounds. We're going to do this in 1 or 2 passes, and we're going to start from the center and work our way out in a crisscross pattern, bringing our pan and our flange up nice and flat and even. And now that we've gone all the way around once, we'll go ahead and do a second round to make sure everything's fully torqued and even. So now we're going to put our cover back on our flywheel here. And something to take note is on the inside corner, you want to make sure that that hole is lined up, because sometimes it'll get hung up on the oil pan and it won't be flat and flush. So once you have your holes lined up, we're going to put this bolt in to start. We're going to snug these bolts up, and then we'll come back and torque these down. So these 3 bolts on this cover are going to get torqued down to 33 foot-pounds. Now that we have our oil pan in place, let's go ahead, put our pole jack back in, and we can start to raise our cradle back up. So when we raise our cradle back up, we're going to want to do it in small increments all the way around to bring it up nice and even. So we'll give this a few turns, and then we'll move to the back two and raise those up as well. All right, so a little bit at a time, all the way around, bring it up nice and even. And now we'll go to the front. So we ended up taking our two front bolts completely out. So what we're going to do now is get our two front bolt locations close enough that we can start our bolts. All right, so we can put our bolt in here, a couple of threads. We'll do the same thing on the other side. All right, now we'll continue to raise our cradle. Now, with this vehicle specifically, you want to make sure when you're raising your cradle that your front motor mount is lining up and not binding up. For us, looks pretty good. We came straight down, we're going straight back up. Just something to keep an eye on. So we're going to raise this up, and we're going to snug our cradle bolts right up. So now we're really close to being back into position. We just want to close up the gap on top, so keep an eye there. And that looks pretty well closed up. We'll move over to the other side and do the same thing. That one's actually good. Now we'll come back. Tighten these two cradle bolts. So our four cradle bolts, they're going to be 17 millimeters. They're going to be 76 foot-pounds. Just switch directions because that might hurt. So now we have our four cradle bolts back in place. What we're going to do is take out our front pole jack, or if you have a jack stand directly in the front here, now's the time you want to take that out. If you're working on the ground, I would suggest leaving the back two jacks in place because we have one more bolt right up top through the motor mount to put in. A little bit easier to work with while it's up in the air. Now we're going to put our motor mount bolt in place. And remember, there's a captured nut on the back side here. So what we're looking to do is just thread straight through into that captured nut. And you may have a little bit of misalignment going on, so it might take a little trial and error to get it to line up. So we're putting the motor mount bolt in. We've aligned our bolt with the captured nut and back. And we're just going to crank it on in until it's snug. I also don't know if you can see this from back here. We do have a pry bar running across our cradle just to help align that bolt. So something you want to take note of is once you get that moving, you want to take a look on the other side and make sure that captured nut isn't bending outwards. Make sure it's still flush and that bolt is going through. Okay, so now we have our bolt in line with our captured nut. Our nut is flush. It's not pushed outward. I'm going to snug that bolt up. And now we're going to torque down our front motor mount bolt to 47 foot-pounds. And now we can remove our pole jacks, or in your case, if you're working on the ground, you can remove your jack stands. So our oil filter is right here. Typically, you should be able to grab a hold of it and spin it off, but after it's been on a while, that might not be the case. And it might be a little greasy. So what we have is just a pair of oil filter clamps here. I'm going to see if we can start this to spin. And again, there's going to be some oil in here. It's almost a horizontal orientation, so there's going to be a whole bunch of oil. There's going to be some drippage. You want to have an oil pan or some kind of spill protection down. All right, once we get this oil filter off, we're going to put it right into our spill container. There's your old filter. Now, before we put our new oil filter on, we're going to clean the surface that our new oil filter mounts up to. Just going to give that a clean with some brake cleaner. If there's any debris or anything left on the surface, now's the time you want to get that off. So our new oil filter sits at a horizontal angle. So we want to prime this filter, but we do not want to fill it. So what we're going to do is pour a good amount in. We're going to let the filter absorb that oil. And when we're ready, we're going to take a little bit of the oil from the top and run it around this gasket here. So now we're ready to put our oil filter in. Now, because we're working with oil, things might be a little slick. What I like to do is wipe down the back of the oil filter with some brake clean. Get that nice and clean. Give it a little second to dry off. And then come back, go ahead and grab your oil filter, and as tight as you can get it by hand, tighten that up. Once you've done that, you're all done. We're going to put our funnel in place. And start our oil pour. This vehicle is going to call for 4.5 quarts. That's including whatever you put into your oil filter. And that's 4.5 quarts. So we're going to remove our funnel. we can cap off our oil fill. Again, if you have any loose debris or anything around this area, make sure it doesn't fall in. And before you put your cap on, wipe that clean. And the last step to this is going to be putting our dipstick back in and checking our oil level. I'm going to clean off our dipstick. You'll notice on your dipstick you have 2 O-rings. You're going to want to seat your dipstick all the way down until not the first, but the second O-ring. Make sure it's fully seated. Go ahead and pull that out. I like to do this 2 or 3 times. The first time I pull it out, I won't even look. Just clean it right off, send it right back in. And I will check this one. And what we're looking for here is our oil level to be between these 2 dots. Here's your low add oil, here is your high too much oil. You want to be between the 2. You can see our levels right about here, so we're right where we want to be. If you haven't added enough oil, this is when you'd want to re-add oil until you're between these 2 lines. Once you're done, go ahead and reinstall your dipstick. So now at this point, you've checked your oil, you've added the recommended amount. What you want to do is start and run your engine. You want to get it up to operating temperature, then shut it off, let it cool down. You want to come back out and recheck your oil. Make sure that oil circulated through the system and you found your new level. If that new level is low, go ahead and add some between the 2 lines that we were looking at. If your level is between the 2 lines, you're good.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.